Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to everyone joining today's second days of our workshop, Asian Catholic in International Relations. I'm Thomas Chinwei Tu from National Zhengzhi University. I'm now a PhD fellow at the university, still doing my PhD. An Asian Catholic in International Relations. This workshop is collaborative between National University of Singapore, particularly ISAC, and National Zhengzhi University, Taiwan. Today is our second day workshop. We're going to move from yesterday panel one, Asian National Consciousness and Catholic Diplomacy, to our panel two, Catholicism and the Sino-Japanese question during the early 20th centuries. Yesterday, we have a very fruitful discussion, especially we have three case studies about the Philippines, Vietnam, and also Korea. And we focus on more on how Catholic Church to help on doing reconciliations. And yesterday, we have a very fruitful discussion, especially regarding, is there a theoretical framework between Catholicism, especially Asian Catholics, and international efforts, international relations? We all know that international relations have several types of model that to describe or explain international relations between countries. But not how we to put Asian Catholics into international relation theories. Today, maybe we can have more discussion about this, and not only presenters, but also we will give the floor to Q&A sessions, and we invited everybody to have more reflection on this. And today we are in panel two. We are going to have four articles for presenters. And we also have our distinguished Professor Saho Matsumoto from Japan Nihon University to do the comment session. So our process will be like we will first invite four presenters to give each 15 minutes presentations. Then we will have Professor Matsumoto to comment on each article for 10 minutes. Then we will bring out again our four presenters to have around like a 3 minutes quick response. Then we open the floor to the audience. So we have more articles today. So without further ado, I would like to invite our first presenter, Professor Emanuele Angiola. Professor Emanuele Angiola is an Italian missionary priest of the Fraternity of San Carlo Borromeo, based in Taiwan since 2011. He earned his PhD in religious study from Furen Catholic University, Taipei, under supervision of Father Pauline, exploring the thought of Wu Jingsheng and the dialogue between Christian faith and culture. He also holds degree in philosophy and sacred theology from the Pontifical Lateran University and a master's in vocal performance music. He got ordained in 2012. He served as a parish priest in New Taipei City and taught at Taiwan Catholic Regional Seminary. He currently teaches at Furen Catholic University and the Furen Faculty of Theology of St. Robert Bellarmine. Now, I would like to give the microphone to Father Emanuele Angiola. He's going to give a speech on faith bridging culture, Wu Jingsheng's Asian Catholic perspective. Microphone is yours, Father Emanuele.
Thank you, Thomas. Hello to everybody. And I start my sharing. I share my screen so you can see my PowerPoint.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, perfect. So I start. We live in a time of paradoxes. Our globalized world appears interconnected, yet remains profoundly divided. People across continents may wear the same clothes, watch the same films, and use the same digital platforms, but this cultural uniformity does not create spiritual unity. The logic of power and the self-affirmation dominates public discourse, while modern communication, instead of fostering understanding, often becomes a vehicle for misunderstanding and hostility. In this fractured world, in this fractured world, that the life and thought of Zhong Xiaochu Hu Jinxiong became deeply relevant, a distinguished Chinese jurist, scholar, and diplomat who devoted his life to building bridges between East China and West, between law and love, between China and Christianity. After his conversion to the Catholic faith in 1937, he realized that Chinese wisdom and Christian revelation converge in God's loving light, which gives meaning to all human experience. In my opinion, whose unique contribution lies in his methodology, the synthesis of opposites within a higher harmony, grounded in divine love and the human unquenchable thirst for truth and an ultimate meaning. By bringing the gospel and Chinese philosophy into a living dialogue, who showed that an authentic faith can transfigure cultures by making their inner lights shine more brightly. His life may be described as a form of spiritual diplomacy, echoing St. Paul's word to the Corinthians. You can see it in the PPT. So we are ambassadors for Christ, as if God were appealing through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. So let us discover John Woo. And first step is his early journey of faith and culture, whose life unfolded amid the dramatic transformation of modern China. Born in 1899, he lived through the fall of the Qing dynasty, the founding of the Republic of China, and the upheavals that followed. For many intellectuals of his time, a deep tension arose between loyalty to cultural roots and fascination with the West. Early 20th century China was discovering the modern world. Western science and philosophy entered Chinese schools, while new political and social ideas challenged centuries of Confucian order, whose education mirrored this encounter between civilizations. Training both the Chinese classics and Western law, he sought from the beginning to integrate different worlds. In his youth, he was introduced to Christianity and received Methodist baptism in 1917. When he received a fellowship for the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in 1921, he wrote from Paris to Justice Holmes. This is the quotation in the PPT. As a Chinese, I have a country to save, I have a people to enlighten, I have a race to uplift, I have a civilization to modernize. He saw his mission as both cultural and moral, an effort to renew China not through revolution but through wisdom. He dramatically affirmed, "My heart was burning like a live coal for international peace. I would rather have my body torn into 1,000 pieces than see humanity torn by another world." He said this after the First World War. And during his journey to the United States to study at the University of Michigan, the Michigan University Law School, he wrote a line that reveals the heart of his vocation. "I used to steal out from my cabin when my roommates were asleep and pray on my knees for an hour or so. On the Pacific Ocean, I was praying for the meeting of the East and the West and for the peace of the world." In the mid-30s, he co-founded Tianxia Monthly, an English language review published first in Shanghai and later in Hong Kong. The title, suggested by Wu himself, came from the classical phrase Tianxia Wei Gong, which can be rendered as "the whole world as one community. It's from Confucius Analects. The journal had aimed to build mutual understanding between China and the West through culture, especially literature. In 1937, after a profound spiritual crisis, Wu received Catholic baptism. He often quoted the verse from the psalm, "In your light we see light," to express his conviction that the light of Christ does not extinguish the light of cultures, but reveals its divine source. This is the topic, the core of my PhD dissertation about John Wu. Christianity for Wu was not foreign to China. It was the eternal truth of the Logos, now made visible in the person of Christ. Moreover, he believed that a Chinese Christianity could bring forth a renewal of Western civilization itself by reconnecting it to its spiritual roots. Once China is rejuvenated by Christianity, he declared, this in its turn will rejuvenate the Christianity of the Occident. First step, Thérèse of Lisieux and the Chinese Way to Christ, whose encounter with Catholicism came through a specific channel, the rites of Saint Thérèse of Lisieux. Her little way of spiritual childhood opened for him the mystery of Christianity as an experience of grace, love, and childlike trust. In Beyond East and West, whose self-biography, he recalled that through Thérèse, he first understood the Catholic Church not as an institution of power, but as the body of Christ animated by love. He wrote, there is unity in diversity and diversity in unity. Very Taoist. True individuality is realized in Catholicity. In Thérèse, who found the living synthesis of opposites that he has sought for years, the resolution of paradoxes not through abstraction, philosophical abstraction, but through love, who considered that Thérèse's spirituality as a bridge to the Chinese tradition. He likened her to both Buddha and Confucius, seeing her the compassion and serene detachment of the Buddha, together with the gentle and wise pedagogy of Confucius. In a letter to Thomas Merton, he wrote, it is Lao Tzu and Saint Therese who have helped me to remain a little child. He believed that though Therese never read the Chinese classics, she lived their essence, because Jesus, the Logos, is the source of all truth. In translating the Gospel of John, John Wu rendered Logos as Tao, affirming that the Tao, lost sound by Chinese sages, had taken flesh to Christ. Let see this affirmation of Wu recalled in The Science of Love. To me, as a Chinese, the great thing about Christianity is that it combines the profound mysticism of Lao Tzu with the intense humanism of Confucius. It differs from Taoism in that the Tao, or the world, has taken on flesh and a warm pulsating heart. It differs from Confucianism in that it is the world and nothing short of the world that has done so. The Confucian idea of God is personal but narrow, while the Taoistic idea is broad but impersonal. Only Christianity can satisfy my mind completely, because its idea of God is at once broad and personal. As it is, Therese, who has confirmed my faith in my religion, for her mind is as subtle and detached as that of Lao Tzu, while her heart is affectionate and cordial as that of Confucius, whose profoundly dynamic vision prevented him from conceiving the encounter between Christianity and cultures as a one-way process of simple fulfillment. His transfigurative perspective enabled him to rediscover human wisdom under a new light. He affirmed how delighted Therese, who had been to know the philosophy of Lao Tzu, he exclaims, and he continues, who could have taught Lao Tzu such wonderful aperçu of the truth, the divine logos who enlightens every man coming into the world. Through Therese, who discovered that faith is not a cultural import, but a living encounter with God whose grace unveils and fulfills the deepest aspiration of the human heart. Her childlike spirit revealed to him a path of holiness that could speak to the Chinese spirit, a way to Christ where simplicity and humility open the soul to divine communion. First step, the diplomacy of law, whose conversion of love, whose conversion did not distance him from the world. It called him to serve it. In 1947, he was appointed Chinese ambassador to the Holy See, becoming the first Catholic to represent a non-Catholic nation in the Vatican. His diplomacy, as he liked to say, was the diplomacy of love. He later admitted, I was such an amateur in diplomacy. His words reveal the heart of his mission, a conviction that peace is not achieved by negotiation alone, but by conversion of hearts. When he presented his credential to Pope Pius XII, he declared that his mission was nothing less than to confirm and increase the intimate relation between the greatest spiritual power of human society and the people of the oldest Oriental culture, with states and with individuals, through friendships, is built upon mutual understanding and sympathy. Peace can only be achieved through love. He hoped that a dialogue between the Vatican and China could serve as a model for peace based on mutual respect and love, going beyond the protocol, who expressed the desire for a wedding between China and Christianity, modeled on the wedding at Cana. He affirmed thus the water is there in the old water pots, waiting with eager patience to be turned into wine. May our Blessed Mother hasten once more the coming of the hour of Jesus.
3 minutes.
Okay. Pope Pius responded warmly, praising his vision on friendship between civilization as rooted in faith. This is the words of Pius the second. I don't have to read. During his years in Rome, he also gave lectures on his journey of faith. In an address at the Pontifical Gregorian University, he declared, we desire peace in the world, but we have forgotten the true source of peace. And the end of the same speech, he gives this in French, who indicates this source. The touchstone of religion is the belief in the existence of someone higher and larger than ourselves, with whom we can commune, to whom we can pray and confess, from whom we can ask forgiveness for our sins, and in whom we can find our greatest peace. These words reveal the interior foundation of whose thought peace is both a divine gift and a human vocation. However, whose diplomacy of love was not sentimental idealism. It was a current vision of human and divine communion, rooted in his belief that only love, divine love, can reconcile nations and civilizations. His service at the Vatican was not merely political, but deeply symbolic. It embodied the possibility of a genuine dialogue between the oldest Eastern civilization and the very heart of Christianity. The last step, beyond East and West, the symphony of Christianity. In his later years, he deepened in his reflection the relationship between Christianity and culture. In his self-biography affirmed, it is a mistake to regard Christianity as Western. The West may be Christian, I wish it were more so, but Christianity is not Western. It is beyond East and West, beyond the old and the new. It is older than the old, newer than the new. It is more native to me than the Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. He was milieu, I was born. I am grateful to them because they have served as pedagogues to lead me to Christ. Christ constitutes the unity of my life. In another, yes, in Beyond the East and West, he affirmed this.
1 minute.
Okay, our pilgrimage, therefore, is neither eastwards nor westwards, but inwards. And this is what I call moving beyond east and west. It is not fair to Christianity to call it Western. And then he also make this affirmation that, of course, there are differences. I don't need to read. You can see this affirmation in the PowerPoint. And the unity of East and West is of polarity and of harmony, and the unity is Christ for in whose life. And we need to read this sentence. If the East does not find the West in Christ, it will never meet the West and love it. If the West does not find the East in Christ, it will never meet the East and love it. Only when they are united in the bosom of Christ will they love each other with the love of Christ, and the union give birth to the new man. This is for me the synthesis of whose thought, and this is my conclusion. That yeah, you can read because there is no more time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Emmanuel Anjola. And it's a very good presentation because it is link it explain how Wu Jingxiong played the role to in the intersection between East and West, and it's very important to know that he is the first Catholic diplomat from a non-Catholic country is in history, especially for our IR discussion. So we keep that in mind, and I look forward to our next discussion. Then I'm going to move on to our second article, second presentation. The second presentation will be presented by Professor Ye Hongling and Professor Xiaoming Li. They collaborate this article. And Professor Ye, he is a adjunct assistant professor at China University of Science and Technology, Taiwan. And he's a researcher specializing in international relations with a focus on East Asian geopolitics, China's foreign policies, and Japan-China interaction. He has his PhD in political science from National Taiwan University. He explores regional integration, security dynamics, and historical perspective. You can find his journal articles in Issues and Studies, and also he is a author for a book called Local Autonomy and Local Regeneration. So now I'm going to give the floor to Professor Ye and also Dr. Xiao. The floor is yours.
Everyone. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to participate this conference and to share our research with all of you. However, today I would like to offer this presentation opportunity to Dr. Xiao from Japan's Musashino University, who has made tremendous contributions to the historical documentations and the article study in this paper. Therefore, I will kindly ask the chair to give the floor to Dr. Xiao for the presentation. Yeah.
Yes, please. Dr. Xiao, his presentation title is The Structure for Diplomatic Recognition with the Holy See, Japan and the Chongqing Nationalist Government as Seen Through Japanese Diplomatic Document. Dr. Xiao, do you have slides? You can share it with us. Yeah, we can. Yeah, can you use the full screen? Uh, It's okay. It's okay. You can use that PowerPoint. Yeah. So we would like to start your presentation. Thank you. Professor Dr. Xiao, you are mute. Please open your microphone. Turn on your microphone. Thank you.
大変失礼いたしました。皆さん、こんばんは。武蔵野大学の、正明礼と申します。本日の報告について、通行の関係で、
Sorry, Professor Xiao, could you present that in English?
すいません。やはり、もども、イオ先生によると、日本語で発表することもできると聞きました。なので、そのために英語で発表することが全然準備しておりません。大変失礼いたしました。そうしなら、もし都合が本当に良くないなら、楊先生により簡単的な説明をさせていただけませんか？
Or you can keep going and we can read your slides. Thank you. You can keep moving on. Thank you.
はい、わかります。はい、本日の報告は、太平洋戦争、勃発後、中継国民政府と、
But I'm afraid because
Yeah, I'm
we're
afraid
not
that
able to read. So I'm sorry, Professor Ye, are you able to present in English or not? There is a misunderstanding here, but the language we're using is English.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's very suddenly to transfer in English because I haven't prepared in English text.
Can you?
The text for my?
Yeah, but it's just that almost all of us will not be able to understand anything of a presentation in Japanese or in Chinese. And so it's either we can have a summary in English or we cannot.
Well, I will, wait a minute. I will help you to finish this speech. Wait a minute.
Could you briefly just introduce this article to us?
Okay, so what we can do is we move on to the next paper, and we the next two papers, and by the end of the panel, we come back to that paper if it's possible to have a presentation in English. Is that okay? I think this way, Professor Ye, you can discuss with Professor Xiao how to proceed, whether you're able to prepare something in English by the end of this panel. So you have about 30, 40 minutes from now, but we need something in English. That's a common language here. And meanwhile, we're going to proceed, Thomas, with the next.
Yeah, of course. Okay,
sorry about that.
Okay, so now we will move on to our third article from Professor Olivier Sibre. Professor Olivier Sibre, he is a IAJ in history, and he has been director of study and research at the Institut Georges Pompidou since 2018. And he's the author of the Holy See and the Far East China, Korea, Japan from Leo 13 to Pius 12. His research is focused on international relations, religion, politics, war, peace, and reconstruction, with particular emphasis on the global activities and diplomacy of the Holy See, especially in Asia Pacific. He also works on post-war French and European history. He's going to present his article from Shimonoseki to Nagasaki and beyond, Japan's unexpected centrality in Vatican diplomacy on international stage. Now, I would like to give the microphone to Professor Olivier. Professor, the floor is yours. You can share your slides.
Guys, thank you very much. Just I will share the PowerPoint. Is it okay or not? I need to use a full screen or not? Or is okay? Just to know. It's okay?
Full screen better.
It's okay. Full screen is better just because I would like to read my paper in the same screen. If it's not possible, it's possible for you. It will be better for me. Just one minute. Okay, perfect. Okay. Thank you very much. In my presentation, I will address the organizers' primary request, namely to focus on Japanese Catholics through the prism of Vatican-Japanese relations and evolving international relations. Since the late 19th century, Japanese Catholics have constituted a small minority within Japanese society, with a proportionally high number of clergy, a fact highlighted by the status granted them by the Holy See since the late 19th century. First, Rome and the first Japanese Catholics. I just have time to summarize this part. Historical research by Jesuit priests during the interwar period and behind focused exclusively on the early history of Japanese Catholicism. The beautiful story of the Kureikuri Shitan long fueled pontifical fantasies regarding Japan's rapid conversion. One could say that the earlier persecutory Japan remained a force sometimes conscious and sometimes not for modern Japan in the Catholic community of the 1930s. The Holy See and religious freedom in Japan. During the ensuing decades and up through the First World War, early generations of Catholics were trained by missionaries congregations such as the Marianists. This took place in the context of the Japanese school system's modernization and Shinto Buddhism's disestablishment. Religious freedom was also established by Article 28 of the Constitutional Charter of February 1889. After the loss of the Papal States, Leo XIII redeployed the Holy See's diplomacy worldwide. In 1885, he sent the first papal letter to the Mikado to encourage its reform, protect Catholics who were loyal subjects, and suggest direct relations with the Vatican. He established in 1891 the regular Catholic hierarchy in Japan, well before his Chinese and Korean counterparts in 1946 and 1962. Inspired by the situation in Europe, Japan debated the relationship between church and state, a debate that even led to Christianity being considered for the official religion. In September 1908, Father Louis Boucher, a Jesuit missionary in Shanghai, followed by Father Stallman, German, and Wycliffe, British, was the first Jesuit to return to Japan. During his visit to Pope Pius X on July 1907, Ushida Kosai, Japanese ambassador in Vienna, emphasized to the Pope that the government did not want a Catholic university, as memories of the 16th century Jesuits were still vivid. They instead preferred a higher education institution that was as non-denominational as possible and compliant with the new Japanese regulations on secondary and higher education. Yoshida Igeku was officially recognized on May 1928. So the first four generations of Japanese Catholic lay leaders only came really of age after the First World War, and there were very few of them before that time. From Shimonoseki to Portsmouth. During the First Sino-Japanese War, the Holy See did not take a position or intervene directly with the governments concerned on the international stage. It instead sought Japan's protection for Catholic missions, particularly in Korea. The Japanese army took this request into account because the government wanted to establish credibility in order to renegotiate the treaties with the European powers. After the Treaty of Shimonoseki, the Holy See renewed its request, hoping that the official regime of religious freedom and security for mission existing in Japan will be extended to mainland China, Formosa, and Korea. Like all other chancelleries, the Secretariat of State of the Holy See was fascinated by Japan's victory over Russia at Tsushima in May 1905 and counted on Japan's influence in East Asia, hoping for emancipation from foreign tutelage, security, religious freedom, and the Christianization of the region via the conversion of Japan. In November 1995, following the victory over Russia, Pius X appointed for the first time in the long history of the Japanese Catholic Church a special representative to the Emperor of Japan, the American Bishop William O'Connell of Portland. His mission involved meeting with the Japanese government, local elites, Catholic hierarchy, and lay leaders, in addition to an audience with the Mikado, in order to encourage the country along the path to religious freedom and promote the establishment of official relations. Then the rise of secular Catholic elite on the national and international stage. I have just time to speak about Yamamoto Shinjiro. Yamamoto was baptized in 1893 while studying at the Étoile du Matin, a Marianist school in Tokyo. He obtained an audience with Pope Pius X in 94 when he was a frigate captain and military attaché in Rome. Bishop William O'Connell met him during his visit to Japan in 95. Yamamoto underscored the importance of converting elites. Following the First World War, he negotiated the establishment of an apostolic delegation in Japan with the Holy See and served as intermediary between the Holy See and Tokyo regarding the fate of the German Catholic missions in Shandong and the Pacific. This matter was linked to German property and colonies seized by Japan. This issue was resolved through Article 438 of the Treaty of Versailles, negotiated by Monsignor Ceretti, the Holy See's unofficial representative. It confirms the Holy See's control over the Catholic mission worldwide. In November 1919, Yamamoto secured from the Holy See the creation of the Apostolic Delegation in Tokyo. With the first delegate, Pietro Fumazzoni Biondi, he negotiated the extension of the new delegation's jurisdiction to the Marshall, Mariana, and Caroline Islands, which had been entrusted to Japan under Mandate C of the League of Nations. Yamamoto also hoped to convert the heir of the throne, for whom he acted as French tutor and accompanied on his European tour in 1921. Hirohito was received by Benedict XV on 15 July. Yamamoto also attempted to pursue his European Catholic counterparts to permit a degree of Japanese influence over Catholicism in order to facilitate its growth, arguing that Shintoism was simply a civil cult lacking any religious dimension. His goal was achieved in 1936 when the Holy See endorsed his interpretation of Shintoism at the request of the Catholic missions in Japanese-controlled Manchukuo and subsequently authorized Catholics to participate in Japanese civil rights. Yamamoto was therefore the archetype for a Catholic elite at the top of the Japanese social pyramid. Despite opposition from Shinto circles due to his Catholic faith, he was promoted to admiral and aide-de-camp to Hirohito in the early 30s. Until the late 30s, he was active in first, mobilizing the church in the war effort against China, defending Japan's expansionist policy by stressing the theology of just war by touring in Europe in 37-38 to justify Japanese aggression, and by commissioning Jesuit fathers in Tokyo to write a pamphlet on Japanese policy in Asia, and earning the definitive esteem and trust of the Curia, which was impressed by his culture during his final visit to Vatican in 1938. 5. The Holy See, pro-Japanese, yes, it's just the word. I will explain that. Pro-Japanese stance from Manchuria to surrender. In 1933, Paolo Marella succeeded Edouard Monet as apostolic delegate in the Japanese Empire because Monet was an American in a time of international crisis. Marella was fascinated by Japan and Japanese culture and believed that the church should maintain a low profile there. In 1938, he published a short French book entitled Vision d'Espoir, Vision of Hope, in which he evoked healthy Japanese nationalism. Communism was Pius XI bête noire and the obsession of Vatican diplomacy in the 30s. On September 38, Pius XI received an embassy from Manchukuo. This created confusion within the Chinese church. The Holy See nevertheless sought to maintain a neutral position in the Sino-Japanese War and actively assisted Chinese civilians. However, Marella publicly blessed the war in China. During his tour of Europe, Yamamoto faced a campaign denouncing Japanese aggression led by Lu Zhengtiang, a prominent Chinese Catholic and former prime minister. Meanwhile, in Shanghai, the Jesuit priest Robert Jacquinot de Bessange established the first international neutral zone for refugees amidst the war. Marella did not send his first critical report on militaristic Japan to the Secretariat of State until 1944. During this time, he continued to praise the conditions of detention while visiting prison camps, expressing concern only when he felt the consequences of American bombing. In the spring 1945, he took refuge in Gora in the Hakone Mountains. In the spring of 1942, Pius XII welcomed Harada Ken, first Japanese ambassador to the Vatican. My colleague will deal with this topic. Just I will precise that Japan hoped that the Holy See would recognize all of its conquests, including the new collaborationist governments from Philippines to Burma, and would forward information and give assistance to Japanese prisoners of war. Among the Japanese clergy involved in the pacification of the occupied territories was Taguchi Yoshigoro, former secretary to the apostolic delegate. Pius XII relied on this recognition to ensure Japanese collaboration in the new Holy See's mission to provide internees and prisoners of war with information and assistance. The question of a negotiated peace between the Japanese and Americans with the mediation of the Holy See has been a recurring topic in the historiography. What is certain is that in 1940 and early 41, the Jesuit father Edmund Walsh, founder of the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University in Washington, traveled between Washington and Tokyo as an intermediary between American and Japanese authorities with a view to avoiding conflict. Japan's rise to power among the Roman elite accelerated during the militarist period with the support of Marella, whom Pius XI considered too Japanese. The Holy See's wartime activity relating to Japan was ultimately proportional to the geopolitical and humanitarian issues connected to the empire of the rising sun. 6. The Holy See and the Church in building the American order in Japan. 3 weeks after the surrender on 15 August, the Archbishop of New York, Francis Spellman, the Grand Chaplain of the US Army, arrived in Tokyo. Despite the presence of numerous chaplains, the missionaries who had left Japan had to come back and new ones brought in. It was also necessary to mobilize the American church, particularly the propagation of the faith in New York and the war relief services of the National Catholic Welfare Conference. From 30s onwards, the American Church became the Vatican's chief funder, particularly for missions. In late November 45, Marella met Douglas MacArthur for the first time. He presented a vision of shared interest, a military figure who was also a politician and a religious leader prepared to launch a crusade in Japan. Pius XII added personal words of encouragement to MacArthur. Father Patrick James Bird, apostolic prefect in Kyoto, and Bruno Bitter, rector of Sophia University, acted as liaisons between the delegate and SCAPE. In January 1946, several Catholic leaders, members of SCAPE, and diplomats created a rehabilitation committee for the Catholic Church in Japan. The committee's purpose was to facilitate and transport large-scale orders for materials and to appeal for donations in the US. The committee sought administrative approval for all activities from the Allied authorities in Tokyo or the State Department in Washington. The Holy See intervened in favor of repatriating Japanese prisoners of war throughout the Asia-Pacific area, and Pius XII attempted to obtain MacArthur's pardon for those sentenced to death by the Tokyo Tribunal. Marella drafted a memorandum advocating for several defendants. The Holy See wanted to preserve religious freedom in Japan at all costs and supported its democratization as a bulwark against the communist threat in Asia. This threat shapes the Holy See entire foreign policy and encouraged its rapprochement with the United States. The total number I finished. The total number of Japanese Catholics was 130,000 in 1950 compared to 100,000 in 1955. So we have a growth remained very low after war, even so circumstances were favorable for evangelization. Catholic influence on the authorities, particularly the imperial household, remained limited. The Japanese government reestablished diplomatic relations with the Holy See after the Treaty of San Francisco on January 52 and several steps with Holy See by 58. The Japanese legation became an embassy and the international a nunciature, establishing full diplomatic relations. So the Holy See's interest in Japan therefore had nothing to do with prospects for evangelization, but rather with geopolitical issues relating to the Cold War. And in conclusion, yes, for the legacy of Vatican-Japanese relation, I just wanted to give two examples with Father Pedro Arrupe and also Marella as Cardinal and President of the Council of Non-Believers from 1964. But to summary, despite the different issue of Japan as are in common with Holy See interests during the different visits of John Paul II and Pope Francis, especially the question of nuclear weapons. So there is a great deal of continuity and stability in official Vatican-Japanese relations. These relations are not proportional to the apostolic reality, the Japanese influence in the Catholic world, but instead reflect the Holy See's interest stemming from Japan's power and role on the international stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Olivia. It's a very fascinating work because sometimes when we think of Japan, probably we will think of Japan's traditional religion, but not Catholicism. But now when it comes to international relations, actually Japan plays a vital role, not only in World War II, but also in Cold War and the far history before. So I'm really thankful for Professor Olivia to bring us from the apostolic delegate to Japan to the formal relationship with the Holy See and until now. So now we're going to move on to our third article. It will be presented by Professor Stephanie Wong. She is Assistant Professor of Theology and Religious Study at Villanova University. She is a scholar of Chinese religion, especially Chinese Catholicism. She teaches courses in the comparative study of Christian, Confucian, Taoist, and Buddhist thoughts and practice. Her research is focused on theological development and interreligious relations of these communities, especially during the dramatic political and social development of the 20th century. And she has a forthcoming book about pro-individualization efforts of Vincent Lebet and a coalition of Chinese Catholic leaders in politics, media, and education in the early republic. The book called Making Catholicism Chinese, the Catholic Church in Modernizing China. It will be issued in early 2026 in January. And she's going to present her article, Chinese Catholic International Engagement During the Second Sino-Japanese War. And now the floor is yours, Professor Stephanie.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. And before I begin, I did just want to apologize. I did not get my paper to Dr. Matsumoto until just today. So please just know that if she's not able to speak much to my paper, that is not her fault. That is entirely mine. So my presentation today here acknowledges how the Second Sino-Japanese War has generally been studied through state-centered frameworks that tend to maintain a simplistic picture of the interests at play. Under the passions of nationalism, one was either for or against national strengthening, and with the marching of imperialism, it was either destiny or threat, us or them. But the transnationality of the Catholic Church in Asia prompts us to suspend those narratives, not because such isms don't capture the dominant contours of the conflict as it was perceived and fought, it does, but because it misses additional interactive layers that were not contiguous with the scope of the state. And in the case of Chinese Catholics responding to the invasion of Japan, we see their efforts at wartime diplomacy, humanitarian relief, and the rhetoric shaping of public opinion unfolding in dialogue with a wide array of international organizations and across inter-ecclesial geographies that do not center the Holy See. So I hope that this attention to the lateral relations of the Chinese and Japanese churches can serve as a corrective, insofar as scholarship has tended to focus on Vatican diplomacy and the role of the Holy See vis-a-vis these respective countries' churches. This paper offers a historical analysis, therefore, of the international engagements undertaken by Chinese Catholics, emphasizing two interlinked developments. On the one hand, their political and diplomatic appeals directed towards the global community, including, for instance, the League of Nations, founded in 1920, and Catholic publics in Western Europe and North America. And two, the intra-Catholic debates over patriotism, just war, and moral responsibility that took place between Chinese and Japanese Catholics. Now, granted, before I get into the details of these rather heated conversations, I want to note that Chinese Catholics little understood or acknowledged the political precarity of Catholics on the other side of the sea, often assuming that the Japanese church had stronger social support from and alignment with the Japanese state than was necessarily the case. And they were also silent on the probable reality that the average Japanese Catholic was unaware of the full scope of the Japanese Imperial Army's activity in China. The post-war Maryknoll missionary in Japan, Leopold Tibesar, later reflected that Japanese Catholics had a pent-up desire for news that had not been accessible earlier. He wrote, "Japan's thirst for foreign news in the post-war days seemed to be insatiable. Japan had been cut off from foreign nations for years during the, quote, China incident, a term that represents one of the greatest understatements of all time. During World War II," he continues, "Japan was hermetically sealed to provide full play for the Napoleonic lie, the military communique. And for several years afterwards, the Japanese therefore read everything, including religious literature. Again, the Catholic Church in Japan was cut short, this time on newsprint and printing paper." I share that just because it speaks to the experience on the Japanese side of access to media. Nevertheless, Chinese Catholics did see that Japanese state narratives about peace-seeking and resistance to Bolshevism, communism, were persuasive to at least some Catholics both in Europe and North America to the west and Japan to the east, and they were keen to set the record straight. So here, my argument that I hope to build in this paper is that what we see is a style of Catholic cosmopolitanism that exhibits a self-consciously public rhetoric. That's what I'm trying to stress in this paper. And so despite appealing to Catholic universalism in many ways, this discourse doesn't actually hinge on the Holy See as a player to weigh in normatively. And I think that has a lot to do with the extent to which these Catholics in China feel somewhat abandoned by the Holy See. And they're not sure that the Holy See is willing to grant the suffering and the interpretations of injustice that they feel so keenly. And so they find their own form of being a global church, operating through public statements issued laterally towards other local churches. I said both, to the North American and European churches, and also to the church in Japan. And though these were issued to local churches, they were also published in open platforms to influence public opinion. This was a very self-conscious public opinion campaign. And so let me just show you a little bit of one of the main sources, though I'll draw on others. This book, published in 1938, was edited by the apostolic delegate, Marius Zanin, during the war, by the French Bishop of Shanghai, and the famous Bishop of Nanjing, Yu Bin. And it was written with a preface by Liu Zhengxiang, who was mentioned at the previous presentation, where he opens the book with this preface documenting young China's sort of noble young efforts to be a nation, and laments how then the Japanese invasion has arrested that and thrown public perception of China into a vulnerable place. And as you look here at the table of contents, you can see what they include in this book, which is translated for an English audience, right? These are documents originally issued in an Asian context, but then translated and published wherever they could. And so we have Pope Pius VI's message to the Chinese people from 1928 when China was unified under the nationalists, a joint statement from the Chinese bishops issued in 1932 to the League of Nations asking for help and for a ruling against the invasion of Japan. And then these statements from the late 30s, when the book itself is published as a whole, from these three bishops, especially Yu Bin, you see that about half the book is him, rallying Catholics to the war effort, but also trying to appeal to Western and Japanese audiences for the moral rectitude of the Chinese case. That's Bishop Yu Bin on the right there. So in part one, I want to flag how Chinese Catholics were appealing to the global community, keenly aware that the international rhetorical context in which they needed to participate. First, and there's three issues I want to point out. First was the fact that looming largely in the background was the very recent experience of Europe's World War I, where Catholics found precedents for Catholic national resistance and international lobbying. Yu Bin, for instance, constantly cites the example of Cardinal Désiré Mercier of Belgium, who had led the Catholic resistance against the German occupation of Belgium in World War I. And he's constantly quoting Mercier on that idol of modern militarism, which Yu Bin sees as being the problem with Japan. And he talks about the virtue of patriotism at length. So too, the letter to the League of Nations shows optimism that by appealing to international bodies and law, these Catholics in China might find some kind of political rectification. This letter, which was actually ghostwritten by the Belgian Catholic priest and naturalized Chinese citizen Vincent Lebas in Tianjin, but then was signed by the 17 Chinese bishops at the time, it hopes for a, quote, definitive judicial pronouncement to stop Japanese expansionism in China. And they challenged the League of Nations to step up, saying you were founded after World War I to resolve conflicts so that it doesn't spiral into more and more violence. So, quote, whether or not a country may still, in spite of the most solemn international engagements, settle a difference, real or imaginary, by force of arms? If the answer is yes, then all the hopes based by mankind on the League of Nations are dissipated and come to naught. Now, there was a 1933 Lytton report issued by the League of Nations, but the Chinese were disappointed at the lack of enforcement, as Japan simply rejected the report and withdrew from membership in the League, and member states were unwilling to commit military aid or strong economic sanctions on Japan. So first of all, that World War I context. Second, there were sermons and letters that these bishops in the volume publish, rallying Catholics for the war effort, that were then redeployed for the Vatican and for Western countries with large Catholic populations. So both the Bishop of Shanghai, Hao Sei, and Bishop Yu Bin of Shanghai wrote their communities urging them to take up the war effort as a matter of duty by appealing to the Catholic just war tradition. So for instance, Yu Bin's pastoral letters quote from the New Testament Gospels about the nobility of laying your life down for your friends, and that quotes from Augustine of Hippo and Thomas Aquinas about the proper ordering of loyalties, including to one's native country. Now, this discourse is really interesting, especially as it gets redeployed in this self-conscious international bid for shaping the public opinion. Because even though Yu Bin certainly situates the Japanese Imperial Army as a kind of enemy, and he does use that language, he's quite careful not to cast them as unprecedentedly depraved or to present the Chinese situation as uniquely distinct. Rather, he insists that the Catholic tradition has long reckoned with the problem of aggressors who would flout justice and disturb the peace, and he situates the Catholic participation in the Chinese war effort as simply characteristic of the Church's perennial commitment to, quote, the common good of humanity. So what I want to stress is that he expresses a kind of Catholic cosmopolitan vision and really affirms universalism. For instance, to the nativist voices on either the Chinese or Japanese side, he insists that China itself is not only an agglomeration of people of the same race, but its sovereignty is rooted in the highest of ideals. He wants to get away from the notion that of a kind of ethnic nationalism for China's own part. And he also notes that the Japanese are not some other race, but he calls them a neighboring people, a brother people, a people of the same race of ours, of the same race and blood, just now sadly taken in by what he calls the psychological problem of imperialistic militarism. So in these essays, the bishops, especially Yu Bin, present a kind of Catholic universalist view, stressing that it is the military aggression that is a hostility to the entire human race. And in particular, that's why the Catholic world needs to step up, especially in a context where the League of Nations had shown itself to be weak. We see you trying to rally the Catholic community and the global Catholic advocacy on these grounds of universalism and cosmopolitanism as a force for solidarity. Thirdly, the other factor that dominates all of these texts is communism. In the 1930s, the church leadership was keenly sensitive to global debates around communism and concerned that the Japanese government was successfully positioning itself in public opinion as the necessary bulwark against communism in China. And so what we see then in these Chinese texts is not a substantive debate for or against communist values per se, but as a point of Japanese propaganda, they feel they must urgently put to rest. It shows up in that 1932 letter to the League of Nations, where the bishops tackle the perception that, quote, China is becoming a prey to Bolshevism, and they rebut that. And so too in Yu Bin's late 1930 essays intended for Euro-American Catholic audiences, we see him at pains to explain that China's people are not in danger of succumbing to communism as the Japanese suggest. In fact, he laments that the Chinese commitment to self-determination has been twisted in the public rhetoric. Quote, he laments, it's enough for a Chinese to be a patriot, for him to become, on the lips of the Japanese militarist, a communist and a brigand.
3 minutes.
Okay, great. So in the second part of my essay, which I'll go through much more quickly, I just want to flag how then in the discussions with Japanese Catholics, and my main source here actually is a letter by Vincent Lebas writing back to 4 Japanese priests and 4 Japanese lay people, where the context is they had asked the church in China to join in a common peace effort to put an end to suffering. And he rejects this, saying, no, this would be an unjust peace. We're not going to go along with what is essentially a peace deal to the advantage of Japan. And he argues, especially with biblical texts from this deuterocanonical material, the story of Judith, for example, and the Maccabees, that it is that the church will never settle for an unjust peace. He also has to tackle the communist critique that people in the West are starting to be convinced that China needs to be invaded by the Japanese in order to stem communism. And he really retrenches then under support for the domestic ruling regime. And along with Yu Bin, has all kinds of statements in support of Chiang Kai-shek that are almost rather shocking, the extent to which he aligns affection for Chiang Kai-shek with affection for God. So where I want, and these are some of these writings which, while originally written in Chinese, then get translated into French and to English and to other writings, trying to convince the Western public not to buy that line of argumentation. Okay, so in conclusion, I am arguing here that not that the Holy See doesn't matter. Of course, it does matter enormously, as various statements in the late 19th and early 20th century were articulating a magisterium's vision of an international order grounded in natural law, social cooperation, and the moral unity. But the reality is that Chinese Catholics did not see the Holy See as being willing to come in on their side and grant that China was the victim, which is what they wanted rhetorically. They saw the Holy See trying to serve as both player and mediator on the international diplomatic stage, for instance, accepting those delegations from Japan in hopes that this could further the Holy See's position in advocating for Catholics in Japan. Or they saw the overturning of church policy against participation in state rights in 1936 while at the same time the Holy See was often criticizing the Chinese Catholics for participating in Chiang Kai-shek's war effort as overly partisan or unbecoming for representatives of the Universal Church. So my sense, it's just a proposition, is that they to some extent give up on the Holy See as any sort of advocate, and therefore develop this alternative cosmopolitan public discourse of resistance. And though they were in close contact with the Holy See, it was only a few years earlier there had been a whole effort by many of these very same figures to lobby the Holy See for Chinese bishops. They seem to see lateral engagements, direct appeals to the European and American churches, or direct rebuttals to some of these Japanese Catholics' interpretation of the war as the more viable sort of Catholic cosmopolitanism than expecting any siding from Rome. And this was the more valuable ground, anyways, in the court of international public opinion. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks for Professor Stephanie's presentation, especially she brought up the very giant name, Cardinal Yu Bin. He's very a patriot to the nationalist Chinese. And also he plays a vital role, not only in during the Second World War, but also afterward to the civil wars. He played a very vital role. Especially, I always remind me that his cardinal coat of arm used the nationalist symbolic things on it. So it's very interesting things, and we can also to reflect on the Catholic cosmology or other things like how to build up the Holy See in the international relations and where is the stance that the Holy See is. And now I would like to, if you allow me, I would like to move back to Professor Ye. Professor Ye, have you already prepared your presentation?
Yes, and let me share our PPT. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. You also have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. And I'm going to talk about fascinating but little known historical event during World War II. How the Vatican maintained diplomatic relations with both Japan and China's nationalist government at the same time. This story's revivals something important about international relations during wartime. The Vatican was one of the few actors in the world that could recognize both an Axis power, Japan, and an alien power, Chongqing, China. How was this possible? And what were each side trying to achieve? And what does this tell us about diplomacy during the Second World War? Today, I will guide you through the events of the 1942 using Japanese diplomatic records to show how Japan, the nationalist government, and the Vatican competed for diplomatic advantage. This is a story of strategies, counter-strategy, and a complex way that countries complete even during the global conflict. First, let's understand why everyone wanted diplomatic relations with Vatican. Before the Pacific War began, China tried many times to establish ties with the Vatican. As early as 1886 during the Qing Dynasty, and again in the early 1000 and 1200 and 900s, China approached Rome, but France blocked these efforts. France claimed special rights over Catholic missions in China, what they call the protectorate of missions. These early attempts all failed, but by the 1920s, things changed slowly. The Vatican sent a papal representative to China in 1923, but China and the Vatican never established full diplomatic relations. when World War II started in Europe in the 1939, attitudes in Chongqing changed. Why? Because important thing was happened. Purple Pius 12 was active in peace efforts. More importantly, American President Franklin Roosevelt sent a personal representative to the Vatican. This showed that the Vatican was becoming a diplomatic player in the world. China's foreign minister's Song Ziwen TV songs saw an opportunities. He noted that many Americans were Catholic, and he understood the Vatican's recognition could help China's international standing. China decided it was a time to try again. In January 1941, the nationalist government approached the Vatican through China's embassy in Italy. The response was interesting. The Vatican said yes, it wanted to exchange diplomats with China, but not now. The international situation was too tense. However, the Vatican made one important promise. It would absolutely not recognize the Japan's back Nanking regimes made by Wang Jingwei. This mattered to China because Japan was trying to set up a puppet government under Wang Jingwei. So China waited, but the international situation don't get better. In December 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. It changed everything. Now here is the international part. In early 1942, Japan decided to establish diplomatic relations with the Vatican. Why would Japan do this during wartime? Because Japanese officers has noticed that America was getting closer to Vatican. They worried that the United States would use Vatican's influence against Japan, so Japan decided to act first. But Japan also had other reasons. Japan had many citizens in South America, like Latin Americas, like in Brazil or Paraguay regions where Catholicism was very strong. Japan needed the Vatican's help to protect Japanese communities in places like Argentina and Brazil and Paraguay. Japan also hoped that maybe someday the Vatican could help negotiate the peace with the United States. Finally, Japan wanted to stop the nationalist government from getting Vatican's recognitions. If Japan had relationship with the Vatican and China didn't, that would be a diplomatic victory. Yeah. January 17th in 1942, Japanese foreign ministers introduced Ambassador Hiroki in Italy to begin the negotiation with the Vatican. By March 30th in 1942, Japan and the Vatican had established official diplomatic relations. It was the announced publicities, but here, what happens next? America's President Roosevelt was upset. He didn't want Japan to have this advantage. So what did he do? According to the Japanese records, Roosevelt sent a message to the Pope and asked him not to recognize Japan. But the message leaked. The British revoked it, and this embarrassed the Vatican and confused everything. So Roosevelt came up with the backup plan. He asked China to request Vatican's recognition too. This way, even if Japan had diplomatic relations with Vatican, China would have them as well. the advantage would be balanced. The American officials, Benjamin Wells, told China's foreign ministers, you should ask the Vatican for an envoy exchange. It will nullify Japan's diplomatic advantages. So China agreed. On March 25 in 1942, just before Japan's relations with the Vatican became public, China introduced its representative to approach the Vatican. So by March 26, the Vatican had already agreed to exchange envoys with China as well. Japan discovered this very quickly. So in the same day, March 30th, the day Japan's Vatican's relations were announced, Japan's ambassador Horiaki in Italia learned that China was also pursuing the Vatican's recognitions. Japan's government is not very happy, was not very happy. So on April 2nd, the foreign minister Togo ordered Ambassador Horiaki to work with the Italian government to stop China from establishing relations with the Vatican. He asked Italy to convince the Vatican to refuse China's request, but the Italians tried. But what the Vatican said? The Vatican said, we have just recognized Japan. We cannot refuse China for the same reason. That would violate our neutralities. Japan didn't give up, and the Japanese government suggests that the puppet regimes, Nanking regimes, Wang Jingwei regimes to the Japan-backed Chinese government should have also asked for Vatican recognitions. And then, if the Vatican recognizes Chongqing but not Nanking, it would look like the Vatican was taking sides. This would embarrass the Vatican and protect Japanese interests. So the Nanking regime submitted a request to Vatican recognitions in May, but the Vatican refused. The Pope said he could not recognize this government established during wartime. Japan's strategy was flawed. And by May 16th, by May 16th, Ambassador Haradas in Rome reported to Tokyo, we cannot stop the Vatican from recognizing China. The Vatican's position is firm. He suggests a new strategy. Instead of stopping recognition, Japan should try to delay China's representative from actually arriving at the Vatican. Tokyo agreed. China's new goal became slow things down as much as possible. But the focus shift. Japan worked with Italy to delay China's envoy. But China has American support. Roosevelt wants China's representative to arrive quickly to show that both China and Japan had equal standings with the Vatican. The Vatican formally recognized the Republic of China in early June in 1942. Then came the questions: who would be China's first minister to the Vatican? China appointed Xie Shoukang, a diplomat stationed in Switzerland. Japan learned this on June 8th. But
3 minutes, thank you.
Yeah. On June 17th, the nationalist government publicly announced the appointment. Now began a waiting time. Japan tried everything to prevent Xie Shoukang from taking up his port at the Vatican, but there was nothing Japan could do. By mid-June in 1942, the diplomatic contact was essentially over. China on the Vatican's recognition, just like Japan. So we can, in the conclusions. So what does the historical episode mean? First, it shows that the Vatican was different from other countries. The Vatican maintained moral neutrality during World War. It means the Vatican tried to be fair to both sides to protect Catholics and religious interests, no matter which side was winning. This unique position allowed the Vatican to recognize both and Axis countries and the alien countries. Second, it shows that World War II was not just a military conflict. It was also a diplomatic competition. Every country competed for advantage in international relations, just even during total war. Japan thought it could gain an advantage by recognition in Vatican first, but the Allies, Americans, and Britain used their own influence to help China catch up. The third, this story shows how religious and the diplomacy mix together during wartime. The Vatican wasn't just another state. It was also a spiritual leader of Catholics worldwide. So the Pope had to balance protecting Catholics in all countries, including countries at the war with each other, with having a good relations with government. The fourth, this episode reveals something about how powers work in international relationships. Japan was a military superpower in Asia, but the Vatican wasn't impressed by military power. What mattered to the Vatican was religious authorities and moral principles. It shows that military strength doesn't always determine diplomatic outcomes. Finally, this case shows the importance of American power in World War II. The United States didn't have to fight every battle militarily. The United States could use its influence to with neutrally the actors like the Vatican to help each other. So let me conclude. In 1942, Japan as a nationality government and the Vatican engaged in facilitating diplomatic competitions. Japan moves first, establishes the relationship with the Vatican to gain advantage over China and to protect Japan's interests around the world, but the United States used its diplomatic influence, helped China to respond quickly. The Vatican maintaining its unique position of neutrality, recognized both countries. This historical moment tells us several things. It shows that diplomacy during wartime was complex and strategic. It demonstrates that the smaller powers and the unique institutions like the Vatican could have significant influence. And it illustrated that international relations involve competitions at many levels beyond military conflicts. The diplomatic context over the Vatican reminds us that even during humanity's greatest conflict, countries compete for the prestige, advantage, and the international standing through the non-military means. Understanding this helps us understand World War II more completely, and it helps us to think how the international relations work today. Thank you for listening.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Ye, for your inspiring presentation, especially bring us to a very mysterious things, because many people think of that the Holy See built up the relationship first with Nanjing government, but eventually it's not from your first-hand research. Now, I would like to move directly to our discussion, Professor Matsumoto. Professor Matsumoto, she is a professor at the College of International Relations, Nihon University from Japan. And I would like to give the floor to her, and we are very we are very looking forward to her comments. So, Professor Matsumoto, you have 10 minutes for this inspiring presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. My name is Saho Matsumoto from Nihon University in Japan. I'm yes, written several book on the Vatican diplomacy during the war and the Cold War period. Okay, so my comments start from the last paper and for the EA's paper, and then move to the Oliver's paper because the two related, and then towards the end is the two other presentation, the Stephanie and Father Emmanuel's. Okay, let's start. Does it work? Sorry. Some reason it doesn't move. It's just okay, it didn't work.
Can you share that again? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Let's start. Yes, and is this in Peter? Okay. And yes, the last paper was fascinating about the struggling for the diplomatic recognition of the policy Japan, and then the Chongqing government of China. And then it's a very impressive the extensive use of the Japanese diplomatic document. And also, I just wondering whether any Chinese diplomatic document in this topic. And then, what about the newly opened Vatican archives? Have you actually looked at any Vatican archive document and this topic? And then the actual content is very much is sort of China, the two China is Chiang Kai-shek, and then the Wang Zhou which Wang Zhou is the Japanese collaborators, the government, and very much divided. And basically, his presentation is actually to the library of the two Chinese government, and then the one is Chiang Kai-shek, and the other one is the Wang Daomin, which is Japanese collaborators. And then, but looking through the Vatican point of view, and then particularly Japan's negotiation with the 1942 to sending Harada as ambassador. But same time, the Chongqing government was doing much the same thing, and then they actually accidentally happened, and it's almost the same year, and then so you can recognize this kind of the competition. And then you are completely right. The Vatican acted neutral power, and then during the wartime. So it's a interesting paper. But could you reply me to my question and the different relation, the highest level, had a mutual exchange. So the Celso Constantini and later Mario Zanni and Bishop the U being, that's the exchange they try to do and the question, and then how the Manchuria issue, and the Vatican actually did recognize Manchuria as a state. So does it actually influence this Chenchan government move to diplomatic negotiation with the Vatican? Okay, so that is my comment on my last paper. And then it related the Oliver's paper from the Shimonoseki to Nagasaki and beyond Japan. I expect the centrality in the Vatican diplomacy to the international stage. And then And you mentioned about a lot of about Paul Marella, and I just how you actually evaluate role of Paul Marella as the Vatican legation to Japan, and because he was very is sort of pro-Japanese attitude he had, and then I think you described was actually Pope sometime, and the Pius XII wasn't so amused. The mother was too pro-Japanese. So I just wonder what you think of the Paul Maleras. And then you talk about the Yamamoto Shinjiro, who is a Japanese naval figure who later became the Showa Emperor's important advisor. And he was the one of the prominent naval officer of the Catholic, and then study is Marian School and Gyosei School in Tokyo. And then so your paper is actually focused on also the from pre-war and during the war and the post-war period. And the post-war period is you talk about Cardinal Spellman, who was sent by United States, and then also you mentioned about Yoshida Shigeru and his family was particularly the Aso family, and then the Yoshida Shigeru's daughter there was actually is a Catholic, so there was this kind of the elite group of the Japanese Catholic, and it was how the influence Vatican diplomacy to Japan. And then another question you mentioned about the Catholic National Catholic Welfare Conference in the United States, and then did they make any sort of contribution of the ease the occupation period by United States to Japan? And then could you tell me about the role of the National Catholic Welfare the conference? And then not finally, the Emmanuel, the Father Emmanuel paper, about the John Woo's contribution, Chinese perspective of Catholicism, and he's the Catholic ambassador to the Holy See, and his philosophy and then his Catholicism was very much merged with Chinese philosophy and religion, such as Confucianism and the Taoism and Buddhism, and so it's. I just wonder is how the Vatican's attitude towards this kind of the John Woo's idea, because for example, the case of Japan, the Vatican recognized, for example, Shintoism is not the religion, it's a cultural tradition. Therefore, is Catholicism and then Shinto they don't clash. And therefore, it's actually Pope didn't have any problem to communication with Japanese emperor, because Japanese emperor is a symbol of the Shintoism. So I just wonder case of China without any kind of sort of similar attitude of the Vatican towards Chinese thinker of John Woo's idea of merging the several Chinese religion and then Catholicism. Okay, and the last paper, not last paper, is the Stephanie's Wang's paper. And then, yeah, I didn't have a paper in advance, so my comment might be so a deep thought. But you are talking about the international engagement of during the Sino-Japanese War, and then the Chinese, the idea, you are also seems to work on the Catholicism relation with the Chinese, the religion and the philosophy, Confucianism and the Taoism. And then, so I could ask the same question to you. And then you were talking about the international organization like the League of Nations. And then, do you know that the another international organization, which is founded at the same time of League of Nations, International Labor Organization, also involve a lot of the Catholic priests, and then particularly during the wartime, and then had a very important role, and also humanitarian activities. And then finally you mentioned about the Catholic theology of the just war and the peace argument. So what you thought you tried to argue through your paper in this big topic, Catholic theology of just war and peace. Okay, so that's the 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's okay. Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for your great comments. And because we are a little bit run out of time, so if may I ask our four presenter to collect the question from our discussion and also from the chat box in together, then to give a quick response about the discussion's comments and also from the chat box. So may I start from Father Emmanuel? You have questions from our discussion and also from Stephanie and from Jai, I think so. So you have three comments. You if you could, you can give us some response. So Father Emmanuel, the floor is yours.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for these interesting questions. I will be brief. I hope to be to be brief. Okay. The first question about the translation of the Chinese classics. Yes, John Wu was a translator. He translated the Psalms, the Book of Psalms, and the New Testament into literally Chinese. So he had to choose the correct words to Chinese words to translate the Holy Bible. So he used a lot of proverbs and expression of the from the Chinese classics. This is a cultural work, very important. There are a lot, not a lot, but some interesting studies about whose translations. And there is a PhD dissertation a few years ago from John Lindblom in Washington, and it's an interesting study. So the question of the Tao, the Logos, according to Wu, the Tao is not Jesus Christ, but is very close to the Christian understanding of Jesus, of the Logos. I cannot enter into this distinction, but it's very interesting. There are good studies about it. Another question was about the natural law. Yes, John Wu was a scholar of natural law. In my opinion, his greatest contribute in this field is not his philosophy of natural law, because this philosophy must to be rethinked, in my opinion. But it is very interesting. His philosophy of human nature is a premise for the philosophy of natural law. In September, October, I held I presented my paper about the John Wu's philosophy of human nature is about to be published. So I hope you can read it. Then there is the question, of course, of from Professor Matsumoto. Yes, of course. The question how Chinese religions such Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism merge with the Catholicism is a huge question. It's very interesting. And also the question of religion and culture, because of course in the Asia, at least the East Asia, religion and culture is not are not distinguished as in the West. So in my PhD dissertation, I wrote about Chinese culture, not religion, because it's a term to be clarified. So I agree that according to Wu, his consideration about the Chinese wisdom is more philosophical than religious. But the apex of the philosophical thought is religious in itself, because it tackles the questions of the ultimate meaning, the meaning of the universe. So they are religious questions, in my opinion. Of course, I wrote a dissertation of 400 pages, so I cannot summarize right now. There was another interesting question in the chat. Yes, from Stephanie Wong. I appreciate her speech very much. And to do philosophical reflection in a time of war. What how can help? Yes, of course. Is if it is only a philosophical reflection is not helping in that time. But I think that the peculiarity of my PhD dissertation is to to draw a model of John Woo from his biography and from his thought. There is a unity in his life and his thought. So for me, the great contribution from of John Woo is this unity of life and philosophy, a profound unity. So his philosophy is very bounded with his daily life, we can say, and this life is lived in a profound unity with his thought. So for me, it's a twofold model, and I wrote this dissertation. The purpose is to make a link between life and thought. So I strongly agree with the concern from Stephanie Wong, because we need such this kind of examples, a living synthesis, a living model for the encounter. So maybe now I can let other people.
Yeah, thank you, Father. So the second one, I would like to go to Professor Olivier, and you have some question from our discussion, and also you can refer a little bit on Father Emmanuel's question and also Stephanie's question, if I am not wrong. Yeah, the floor is yours, Professor Olivier. Professor Olivier, are you there? Or we just cherish our...
Olivier is muted.
Olivier, you muted.
Yes, yes. I will refer first to Professor Matsumoto about Marella. Yes, very interesting question. In fact, I will try to be short. In fact, yes, Maria had a very important role and position, and the principal reason is his position in the church structure, in the diplomatic structure, and especially his relation with his protector in the career, the Cardinal Fumasoni Biondi. Because we have a high here from the bottom, but we should have also a vision from the up. and the Catholic Church is a global institution with an hybrid government. This is very difficult to respond to different issues in international relations and other historiography, etc. So he was protected since he was Secretariat of the Apostolic Delegation in Washington. Fumasoni Biondi was the first apostolic delegate in Japan, and after he went to Washington, and in Washington, Marella had close relations with a Japanese elite in United States. And when he arrived in Japan, he succeeded to American Bishop Mooney. And this context was a context of international crisis and the evaluation by Fumasoni Biondi. And Fumasoni Biondi arrived at the head of the Propaganda Fide at the same time in 32. And Marella was moved from Washington to Tokyo in 33. So just a year after. It's not a coincidence. It's okay. And when he arrived, he experienced a difficult situation with Oshima Island, where there were many Catholics, Japanese Catholics, and they had to leave this island, and it was a little crisis with Japanese authorities. So after this experience, and why he was very impressed and fascinated by the Japanese culture, but the culture of the elite especially, he considered that the church should not have to resist to the pressure of the government about religion, etc. So his position was to adapt the church to the reality of the moment as a diplomat, and for him it was not a treason, but necessary. And the top of this policy, this strategy was in 1940. At this moment, he called to the ordinaries, foreign ordinaries and superior of communities, etc., and university in Japan to leave their job, and that Japanese had to replace and to take the place of foreign Catholic ordinaries. It was very and this choice to adapt to the law of religious cooperation of 1939 was criticized by the cardinals of propaganda in Rome. But he continued his mission because he was sustained by Cardinal Fumasoni Biondi. And when Marella asked to send a representative in Manchukuo, Fumasoni Biondi noted, "You know what I have to do. It's a word." I think it was a bit the same as this expression. I am confident, and you are my friend, and I don't know exactly the term, but it's very important, this close relation between the priest and the diplomat, and in this structure, it's a very special culture of link, of protection, as in Italy, we know very well. And in the traditional Rome, you know, the protection of senator with people in the city of Rome. And it's the same culture in a Roman Catholic Church. So he has his very important position because he was apostolic delegate in Japan, in all the Japanese empire. And during the war, it was difficult to have contact with Mario Zanin in China, with the apostolic delegate in Manila. But Marella conserved the contact with Europe, with Holy See, etc. So he sent many reports, very clear. And Marella has very good sense of for the report, for the redaction. And when in Rome you receive the report, it's very important, the quality of report and the psychology of the diplomat, because all is analyzed in this structure, and in the same time, psychologically, it's important. So he has a very important place as an interpret, as a translator of the Japanese reality and the real position of the government behind the propaganda. And it is very important. It is very difficult to summarize what I want to explain, because you are at the key, the crossroad of this culture of management. I don't know how to explain that in the Catholic Church. And in Japan, it was this moment with this key man. It's very important, because when you see the Roman Catholic Church, you see structure. But in fact, you have men. But very behind the structure, it's very the secret culture in the Catholic Church. So he had a very important role. And at the end of the war, Jesuit father sent a big report to Spellman about Marella. And the psychological portrait and that the analysis of his strategy was very bad. They explain he has to leave. It's impossible he have to leave. And Fumasoni Bondi keep Marella in Japan after the war, and Marella passed from pro-Japanese attitudes with elite and government to pro-American collaboration. So to reply to the other question about the escape, did it help to ease escape occupation policy toward Japan? Too easy, I understand less hard, I suppose. Yes, okay, it's yeah. In Philippines, the escape role is very important, because it is a situation of presence, American presence, and in Philippines. So the American hierarchy has a direct role in the reconstruction. In Japan, it's a bit different, because the church didn't want to appear too linked to American occupation. But in fact, there is a close link, very close. But this link passed through the apostolic delegation, and the apostolic delegation with this committee of rehabilitation of the church in Japan. I discovered many papers, two last previous years in the Pope 12's archives about this link of financial and material link between United States, Japan, in the context very difficult of yen devaluation and escape regulation. It is many complicated question of economic, logistic, etc., etc. And I am very involved in practical matters to understand what is also the Vatican diplomacy in this context. So I don't know. I don't think that the escape had an influence to ease the administration, American administration. It's impossible by the nature of the things between. Okay, but. The Holy See, the Pope, and Marella tried to help for the repatriation, for example, of Japanese in all the Asia Pacific area from Burma, etc., and to respond to the request of families, etc. So, but it was not the job of SCAPE, and Spellman visited 2 times in 5 years Japan, just after the unconditional surrender, and he flight under Hiroshima and Nagasaki with a very incredible comment about all the destruction. He was so impressed of the situation, and I read extraordinary later about that. And after another visit in 1948, and he was received by the emperor. So Catholic Church was welcomed by the American administration, and MacArthur and thought that the missionary should convert Japan. And to respond to another question, your question, and another from my colleague Stephanie, is why there is two moments when the church, the Catholic Church, of the conversion of Japan. When Father Petit-Jean discovered the Kurekiri-Shitan, it was extraordinary for the Pope Pio IX. It was a bit expression of the resistance of the Japanese mentality during the Sakuko, the closed period of Tokugawa. So first, and second, the modernity of Japan. For Holy it's the old institution in war against secularization in Europe. But when they see the reality of modernity in Asia, they consider that modernity could be joined with Christianization. So when you have the disestablishment of Shinto Buddhism, when you have a constitution with an article about the religious freedom, and the condition of the security of a modern state as Japan, they hope that we will have all the conditions for the evangelization. So it's possible, there is the hope of a conversion. From the Pope, think about that. And for example, the Secretary of State, Cardinal Mary Delval, when Japan fight and had the victory against Russia, the position of policy is not to say, oh, it's terrible because what will be the European power? No, the reaction is to say, okay, the future is in Japan. If Japan will convert, and they have the vision of a Japan as a pyramid, you have the emperor, the elite. If you convert the elites, that is the reason why it's very important to convert the elites. And when you send the Jesuit society, they have a tradition to convert the elites. So they push it during decades to convert the elites in Japan, and they work out for that, and they give money, etc., etc., etc. So I try to respond to that. And after the World War II, you have another context of freedom, because between the two freedom at the end of the 19th century and after the two World War, because between the two periods you have Shintoism in Japan, so it's another question. It's not I will not deal with that now. The only thing and the administration, etc., that there is a good context to convert Japanese people and the elite after the war, in close relation with American occupation. And in this close relation, you have two arguments for the Holy See. You have resistance against communism, that is the obsession of the Holy See from the early 30s. And second is a very important place of the Catholic Church in the global church administration, especially financial. And Spellman was like a banker for the Holy See. He has a very important place. I have an example. I discovered in the archives of Spellman in New York that Pius XII sent him to in New York in 19. He returned in New York. He was in Rome and discussed with Pope, etc. And returned in New York the end of 1939, and he invests money from the Vatican in Wall Street for the first time with different American investments. It is very important, you know, this question of money and the Bank of Vatican, the religion during the war. So for the mission, it was very important. The National Catholic Welfare Conference during the war, it is War Relief Services, and you have a propagation of the faith in New York, and the place of they finance very high all the mission series in the world. So when Spellman came in Japan, it was very important. So in conclusion, I think when you consider Catholic Church everywhere, you have to consider concretely the local history, but also the global and middle global vision, strategy, adaptation of this structure. It's very important. So when you study Catholic Church, you don't study as Protestantism or Protestant Church or another religions. It's very specific, and I think we have very many issues conceptually and methodologically to connect this history with other history. Sorry, I speak a lot, but it was very interesting question. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, because we are running out of time. It's already 10, so we still have 2 responses from Professor Stephanie and Professor Ye. So could you please concisely respond to the discussion and also the question in the check box? And could you please concisely within 5 minutes? So I will give the floor to Professor Stephanie. Thank you.
Great. So Professor Matsumoto asked me to say more about the kind of theology of justice and peace, as well as raising the issue of labor organization. That's a great point. And I admit I didn't look into some of like the labor journals that were really popular both in Europe and China, though these Catholic patriots certainly had activities among the labor movements. I suspect the reason why it's not showing up in the kind of official documents, especially the international facing ones, is precisely because they're so worried about the international perception of China as communist, right? Like, so even though there are many Chinese Catholics who are worried about issues of labor and are involved in the labor movement, and to some extent even have relations with Chinese communists, both in France, where there's this student worker movement, some of the eventual leaders of the CCP are involved in the Chinese Catholic sort of networks of France. I think by the time we get to 1930s, so much of the rhetoric justifying Japan's invasion of China is that Japan is going to be the savior of the world from Bolshevism, right? So like Japan is trying to claim that role of being the bulwark against communism. So the last thing these Chinese rhetoricians want to do is say, oh yeah, and we're hanging out with communists or people who are interested in labor. That would be my guess. More generally on the question of a just war of theology and peace, and also dovetailing with the question about universalism and particularism, I think what I'm trying to stress is that I see a kind of tension between the Holy See's effort to function as a mediator on the international stage, where it has to sort of treat people at least procedurally equal and be neutral party, so to speak, right? Okay, well, the Japanese want to have a delegation, so we'll let it happen. But okay, well, then we'll let the Chinese have a delegation too, because the Americans think that there needs to be parity, right? Like there's this effort to sort of keep it even. And to be honest, I think that's precisely what's rankling so many of these Chinese clergy who don't think that this situation can be assessed at all through neutrality. And the language of universalism then is tricky because, right, on the one hand, they're willing to grant the universal accessibility of the gospel, sure, or they want to grant the universality of the human heart, that there's a common universal human race, or maybe they'll even grant that the Holy See as a mediator needs to have a kind of procedural parity when it deals with different Catholic populations in different areas. But what they don't want that to mean is that then it's just he said, she said, right? Okay, well, both China and Japan are sort of equal infractors here. Because from the Chinese perspective, that's so vehemently argued in these pieces, in these sources, they're saying it's not equal, right? Like, we're not the ones that started this. Japan invaded us. And so, for instance, Vincent Leb and Yu Bin are constantly saying to the Japanese Catholics, and I admit I didn't have time to get into this as much, they write back to that Japanese circular saying, you act as though we can come together from sort of similar places of suffering and sadness about violence to join in a peace effort. But like, we haven't invaded your country. It's you who've done these horrible things to our people. And they go through the litany of so many various atrocities. So in large part, what the war effort on the Chinese side is trying to do is like hold off this discourse of universalism and hold off this notion that the Holy See can be neutral, because that's precisely what they feel is leaving them out to dry, and shortchanging the ability to draw on the Catholic just war tradition, which doesn't treat everybody as sort of a foregone equal party, but grants that there are unjust wars that are and there may be a party in the right and a party in the wrong. So the last question I'll note is, okay, so what is all this about kind of Chinese or, ethnic nationalisms? What do we make of all this in light of the religious commitments of these communities? I guess one thing I'll note is, and I argue this actually in my book that's about to come out, which is that the Chinese pro-indigenization movement largely adopts the kind of modern model of the nation state. And they do that proudly in 1912 because they see it as an improvement, that Catholicism can count as a religion under the Constitution, that they can have religious freedom of belief, and operate, legally as an entity among others. However, what that does is it does bring them to see religion as a kind of civic participant in citizenship, right? And this shifts away then from the original goal of the indigenization movement, which was to make Catholicism Chinese in a more functionalist sense, right? To participate in the rural village networks that had long operated, or to participate in what Mayfair Young and Prasenjit Duara, some historians and anthropologists, have called like this cultural nexus of power that was quite diffuse, but often operated in tension with the state and its kind of claims to ethnic nationalism. So it's understandable why they did it in a moment where they're trying to prove that they're not foreign, right? Like we're not French, we're Chinese, that kind of a thing. But it is fundamentally a move towards adopting the model of the modern nation state and accommodating to state power. That is the trajectory of the early 20th century for the Chinese Catholic Church, along with the Protestant churches that adopted that model of what a religion is.
Okay, so that's a whole response from Professor Stephanie, right? Okay, now it's almost 10, more than 10. Okay, so now we are moving on to Professor Ye, and you also have 5 minutes to conclude your response. Thank you.
Thank you for everyone. I should apologize first because I messed up some things for acknowledge for wrong things, and I shall apply to answer the question from the Matsumoto Saho professor that here. First, currently the available Chinese documents do not show clear evidence. Further research is needed to find related literature in the future. The second question is about the Manchuria's empire, that the popular regimes. The legitimacy of Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalist government depends on not losing Manchuria, so on the issue of Manchu Kok, the nationalist government naturally opposed the Holy See establishing diplomatic relations with it. On the other hand, the Holy See's position on recognizing Manchu Kok was somewhat ambiguous. It never formally dispatched official diplomats or apostolic representatives to Manchuria. Furthermore, from the diplomatic negotiations between Chongqing and the Holy See starting in early 1941, what was the nationalist government care about most, aside from establishing relations, was probably to prevent the Holy See from duplicating the Manchurian Empire experience by establishing relations with Nanking, as that would severely undermine Chongqing's representation as the sole central government of China. Yeah, I just replied for shortly. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Professor Ye, for very reserve our time. And now it's already 10:11. So I'm going to close today's panel, and I have some announcement here. Tomorrow, the third day of the Asian Catholic International Relation, we have 2 panels. One start from 2 p.m. Taipei time, Singapore time. The other one is start from 8 p.m. Also Taipei time, Singapore time, and following by the panel 4, we will have a closing remarks. So I really wish to meet you all tomorrow, in the evening or in the morning or in the afternoon. So thank you for your participation today, and thanks gives to for present a very fruitful presentation about your research outcomes, and also thank you to Professor Matsumoto for very inspiring comments on 4 paper. And sorry for my wrong time control that to let everybody to stay here more than our expectation. And thank you so much. And sorry for that. A lot of questions in chat box still waiting there to explain to reply. I wish you all can find the contact information to contact each other. And thank you so much. And we're going to have our panel tomorrow in the afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.
Thank you.